Welcome back to the Here We Go podcast. I am your host, Trent Ging. Today I'm going to talk about the wide receiver room. This is a controversial topic right now because everybody's waiting on the Brandon Aiyuk news. So while we're waiting, I wanted to talk about something that people really aren't talking a lot about. Are we starting to see movement on this depth chart already? I'm going to argue, and I'm going to cherry pick something that Colin said in our last live episode, that there has been some movement on this depth chart already. He brought something up that I didn't think about initially, but something that I think he's onto. So I think the wide receiver 2 position, as it stands right now, barring trade or maybe a surprise cut where we pick a guy up who we didn't expect to be available, I think wide receiver 2 now belongs to Van Jefferson. And I think he's really putting some distance between himself and Calvin Austin. I wasn't really sure anyone else at the time was going to be in line to try to compete for that job. Roman Wilson's somebody you probably could throw in there and say he was competing for that job as well. I just never really felt like it was a good fit for him yet. Okay, let me preface that yet. Roman Wilson has played primarily on, and not just primarily, I mean, he's pretty much played the entire time he was in college in the slot. He's done almost all of his damage out of the slot as a receiver. And it would be a really big adjustment for him to move outside this early. It's why he was available in the third round in the first place. He's a talented receiver. There's no doubt about that. Pains me to say that because he played for the team up north, but he is a very talented receiver. And the Steelers found something when they got him in the third round. They showed some patience. They knew this was a big need. They addressed, in my opinion, the bigger needs, which was the offensive line. If you don't have a good offensive line, it doesn't matter what you have at the skill positions. That's why a lot of us who've been fans for a long time and are a little older were so frustrated by Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth getting picked in the same draft. Because we already had a bad offensive line at the time, and we weren't doing anything to address it. So, in my opinion, I think a lot of us who have been around the fan base for a while, we've been spoiled. This team has always had a good offensive line throughout its history. But we've really fallen off over the last number of years. You know, DeCastro retires early. That hurt. Didn't really replace him. We tried some makeshift stuff with, Trey Turner, whatever. We just never really got it. You know, Kevin Dotson starts. He plays pretty well. We move him. Bring in James Daniel, then Dotson's terrible on the other side. We've tried a number of different things to try to make this thing work. But we finally feel like we're in a position where we've made the right picks on the offensive line. We've rebuilt this offensive line. And now we have an opportunity to try to utilize it. So by drafting a tackle in the first round and a center in the second round, that was kind of the completion pieces to the puzzle. Finding Roman Wilson in the third, although he's going to play slot this year, and I don't think he was going to compete for the wide receiver 2 like others did, I think it's going to be a perfect fit for him to get used to the NFL. Let him adjust to the speed of the game. He still can do a lot of damage out of that slot receiver position. And I'm not sure if he knows how to get off press coverage or not because we've never seen it. They may have given him a shot throughout preseason to try this, but the injury is a setback. So I think he's going to fit nicely into the slot role. And I'm not sure the team's going to push it the way that Van Jefferson has kind of taken over and has shown so far that he's capable of being that number 2 receiver, it's not going to change now. I think he's pretty much it, outside of, like I said, a trade or maybe a surprise cut for a guy that could be a wide receiver 2 on this team. So what does this mean for Calvin Austin III? I think now it can mean a number of different things. I think number 1, he could easily be a guy thrown in on this Brandon Aiyuk trade if that goes through. The reports keep coming up that we're not going to involve a player. But I think Calvin Austin III has gone from a guy competing for wide receiver 2 to probably the 4th receiver on this team once Roman Wilson's like fully back and fully integrated back into the offense. He could even get cut. I think he's played pretty well throughout camp from all the reporting. But he did all of his damage late in the game, in the preseason game. I think he needs to play well in the next 2 preseason games to solidify a roster spot, because the thing that Colin brought up that I found interesting was that Scotty Miller played really well. And now Scotty Miller is creating a little bit of buzz for himself. He's done nothing flashy, but he's just done everything right. If he continues to get open and he starts to outplay Calvin, this could really flip the tides for Calvin Austin from being a guy who's competing for wide receiver 2 to a guy fighting for the roster spot on the team. Scotty Miller can return punts. He's done it in his career. Austin wasn't a particularly good punt returner anyway, despite all of his speed. Quez Watkins had a horrible game, which kind of makes Scotty Miller push Quez Watkins, and I think you have to flip-flop those 2. I had Miller as a 6th wide receiver, maybe 7th, depending on where you put Dez Fitzpatrick. But Scotty Miller's coming up this depth chart a little bit, and I actually think he passed Dez Fitzpatrick. Dez is not showing to be a strong receiver. He's had a couple of drops now again. People called him sure-handed. I remembered him dropping passes last year in camp. But he does bring some special teams value, or so we thought. In the preseason game, he commits a penalty by running out of bounds on his own, not touched. I mean, those are just things you can't do when you're fighting for a roster spot. Punt coverage wasn't good. Cameron Johnston was putting the ball out there, and just no one was getting downfield. So Dez Fitzpatrick isn't showing in that phase of the game that he can play. That's why I think Scotty Miller's bumped up ahead of Dez Fitzpatrick. Quez Watkins, he tries his hand at returning punts. He muffs one officially, and he badly misjudged 2 punts. That's why he muffed it in the first place, because he just couldn't get underneath the ball and get his body squared away. He was atrocious in that game. Now, people said he's had a couple of good practices afterward. I mean, at some point, you got to put it on tape. So, Quez is definitely, he's going to get another opportunity, but that guy's a cut candidate right now with the way he performed in that first preseason game, in my opinion. So is Scotty Miller jumping above Quez Watkins now also? I mean, I think you could make an argument for it. And that's where Colin was kind of going with this thing, is he was trying to say Scotty Miller's making a run at this. Could he run all the way up to fighting Calvin Austin for wide receiver 4? Maybe. We've seen him have successful years in Tampa Bay. We'll see how this whole thing plays out, but I think you're seeing some movement on that depth chart already. I know the official depth chart may not reflect that. There's not a whole lot of changes on there, but it seems to me Like, the team should be giving Scotty Miller a little bit more of a look and throw him back at punt returner. See if he can handle those duties better than what Quez Watkins did, better than what Calvin Austin has done. And let's see if any of these guys start making plays before the second half against first or second string guys. Because if you're going to be a part of the offense, you have to be able to do it against the first team. You can't wait until the third and fourth quarter when you're going against guys who are the third team guys or, roster bubble guys that are never going to see the field or never even going to be on the team. And I'll ask this. So everybody in Steelers fan base right now is hoping this Aiyuk trade goes through. If it does go through and we don't give up any players, who's the next odd man out in this wide receiver room? I think this team's only going to carry 5 because of the way Arthur Smith's offense runs. So who would be your 5? Obviously, your George Pickens. Obviously, Brandon Aiyuk would be on there. Obviously, Roman Wilson would be on there because you're definitely not cutting a rookie. I think you're keeping Van Jefferson. Because if he's going to be your wide receiver 2 right now, why in the world would you look to get rid of him? Because he doesn't really bring any special teams value, maybe? But none of these guys really do. Who would be the odd man out? You'd be looking at Quez, Calvin Austin, Des Fitzpatrick, and Scotty Miller all fighting for one spot. None of them cover punts. None of them are on kickoff. I know Quez was practicing some of that stuff a little bit, but none of them have done it in their careers. So what value can they bring to the team as a wide receiver 5 even? Do we even need any of them? Or do we need to go out and look for a guy who can play special teams that gets cut from another team's roster? I still think there's going to be more room to work with on this depth chart. I still think we're going to see some more movement as things start to pan out because, typically the Steelers like to run wide receivers, especially in punt coverage, as their gunners. But there's no one outside of Des Fitzpatrick who's done it at the bottom part of this depth chart. And Des didn't really play very well in the preseason. That is his path to a roster spot there right now. Because it's not as a receiver. He's just not been a good receiver. Which is surprising because there's people who like him. And my point to this is that Calvin Austin could go from a guy competing for wide receiver 2 to possibly getting cut when this thing's all said and done. The other side of this coin is that he's the punt returner on the team right now. And of the guys I've mentioned who would be the top 4 guys, none of them return punts. So who would become your punt returner? Let's throw another wrinkle into the mix. John Rhys Plumlee is now taking reps at wide receiver. Does he find a way to fight his way onto this roster? Because he was covering punts. He was on kickoff. Can he return a punt maybe? I don't know. I know he's practiced. Does this guy become a dark horse who comes out of nowhere and makes the team because he's working on all aspects of his game on special teams? I don't think so. But it's interesting nonetheless. What if he gets a kickoff in these preseason games and he returns it really well? What if he ends up on punt and does a punt return and takes that ball, picks up some nice yardage? What if he covers punts and continues to make tackles? Because he made one last game. He's very, very undersized. But if he's showing production, what happens if he accidentally does something like that and makes the team? It's going to throw a wrinkle in this whole thing. So it's fun to think about, fun to talk about. Not sure it actually happens, like I said, but the team clearly likes something about him that they're willing to move him around, and he's obviously willing to do what it takes to try to make this roster because he's still taking QB reps from what we're told, as well as taking the wide receiver reps, finding ways to work on special teams. I mean, the guy is just trying to do everything right now to make this roster. So it'll be fun to watch how that thing plays out. He was also drafted in that UFL draft. Does he just decide, forget it, like I don't want to be a bottom of the depth chart type of guy or a practice squad guy. Maybe I'll just go to the UFL and play there and continue to work on my game. I don't know, maybe. But I still think the potential is there for movement on the wide receiver depth chart. The Aiyuk situation obviously is going to factor in. And if we sign Brandon Aiyuk, Van Jefferson has played a lot of his career out of the slot. Who becomes the slot receiver in that instance? Is it Roman Wilson? Is it Van Jefferson? We may see Tomlin say, hey, let's go with the veteran guy for a while and just work Roman Wilson into this offense, kind of similar to what he did with like Joey Porter Jr. and Broderick Jones last year. Bring him on slow until he knows for sure that the fan base is screaming for his job if he doesn't start playing these guys. I think it's going to be really interesting to see not only, and I do think the Brandon Aiyuk thing's coming to a close sooner rather than later. I mean, we're kind of at the point where somebody is going to say, listen, take it or leave it. Either the 49ers are going to tell Aiyuk to take it or leave it, or he's just playing out the fifth year, or Pittsburgh saying take it or leave it to our offer because, we've got to make sure we work on things on our team because they've got contracts to work out, and they're sitting on these contract negotiations based on what happens with Brandon Aiyuk. I mean, the Cameron Hayward contract, the Pat Freiermuth contract extension, like I think those talks are literally sitting around waiting on Brandon Aiyuk right now. At some point, Omar Khan has got to start working on these negotiations and get things done before the season starts because Pittsburgh doesn't really do business during season. They never have. If they want to try to make a trade, if the Aiyuk thing falls through, they've got to have some time to do this stuff. So there's a timetable on this. And I've been telling people to be patient because I know at some point, the longer it goes, the better it is for Pittsburgh because Aiyuk continues to put pressure on San Francisco. He's either going to get what he wants out there or he's going to try to find his way out. I'm shocked by how much San Francisco has responded to it. I really thought he has no leverage, so why should they listen? And I've always said that I think that they end up paying him. And I still obviously think that's a very real possibility. I think we're at a 50-50 chance that this thing still could go either way. But it's got to be coming to a resolution here. I don't know. Hopefully by early next week. Because I can't see Omar Khan waiting until the start of the third preseason game. Maybe he will. Maybe they just want this guy enough that they're willing to wait for him. But I'm not sure that I would wait around forever. At some point, I think the reporting that came out yesterday was based on Pittsburgh trying to put pressure on San Francisco. And at some point, Omar Khan really, he's probably just going to tell them, like, take it or leave it. I can't wait any longer. Like, I have a roster that I need to try to work on, and if you're not making this deal, I can start working on my roster now. If you're going to make the deal, I need to know what the deal is going to be and that it is finalized before I start doing my other contract negotiations. Because I could really determine whether or not we even try to re-sign Cam Hayward. I mean, it could be that serious. I don't know. But I could easily see that they say, hey, listen, if we're taking this kind of a contract on offense, we can't afford to pay Cam Hayward $16 to $20 million a year. There's no way. And Cam's not going to want to work for free. I really think the IU contract could signal the end of Cam Hayward as a Pittsburgh Steeler. And I don't think that's an overreaction or an exaggeration. I think the Brandon Ayuk trade is going to determine whether or not they try to keep Cam Hayward. Pat Freiermuth, I think they're going to try to sign regardless. They just want to know how much they're going to have available to sign, so they know what they can work with and if it's realistic to try to go after him. So I think a lot of our contract negotiations, why it's been so quiet on that front, is simply because they're waiting to see what happens with this current trade offer. There's a lot of things right now that one player is really kind of holding up, and a lot of cards and a lot of dominoes that are going to fall as a result of whether or not this deal happens. But for those of you who've been sitting on pins and needles waiting on it, waiting for that breaking news from Adam Schefter, I don't think you're going to have to wait a whole lot longer. And I don't know that it's going to happen today, but I'd be surprised if this thing goes all the way through next week. And I don't know anything. I have no, like I've said before, I don't try to mislead anybody. I don't have sources. I just think the way the Pittsburgh Steelers do business, they don't do any negotiations in season with contracts. They're going to want to start working on these things. We're starting to get limited on how much time we have before the season starts. I think at some point Omar Khan says, listen, enough's enough. Either you're going to take the deal or we're backing out of it. It's totally up to you. Maybe he'll use Ayuk's agent to put some pressure on San Francisco. I don't know. But I just feel like it's got to come to an end at some point. And it's got to come to an end sometime pretty soon, maybe by the middle of next week. That would be my guess. Could be the end of next week, but that's only going to give them, 2 weeks till the start of the season to get the other negotiations done. I'm sure that's plenty of time for somebody like Omar Khan and what he's done in the past. But seems like it'd be rushing a timetable and not giving a lot of time for some back and forth between agents and Omar. So either way, we'll see how this thing plays out. I just thought this was something interesting, and the way Colin kind of presented it made me think that there really is a lot more movement. I mean, I kind of felt Van Jefferson locked up the wide receiver 2. What does that mean? Does Calvin Austin move into the slot as the 3? For right now, yeah, as far as Roman Wilson's injury, but once Roman's healthy, does he slide right into that? Because he was playing very well. He was really the most productive receiver in camp. He had the most catches. So we'll see how that whole thing plays out. Just thought it was interesting to think about. I hope you guys all think it's interesting as well. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you think I'm way off base on this thing. What do you think will happen if the Brandon Ayuk trade does go through? What do you think the depth chart will look like? I really want to know your thoughts and opinions on this. So, as always, if you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave me some feedback. Let me know what you like. Let me know what you want me to cover in the future. I appreciate you listening. Hope you all have a great day.